Police arrest a black single mother for a simple misunderstanding, treating her with disrespect and throwing her into a world of confusion and fear. But what happens when her brother, an FBI agent, shows up? Picture this: a black woman just trying to get through the day, carrying her groceries, minding her own business. Suddenly, two police officers stop her, demand to see identification, and accuse her of something she didn't do. She tries to explain, but they won't listen. Instead, they escalate the situation, handcuffing her and throwing her into the back of a squad car like a criminal. The officers show no mercy, no understanding, only power. But here's where the story takes a shocking turn. As the woman is hauled off, her brother, an FBI agent, arrives on the scene. He doesn't just show up to watch. He's ready to take action. What happens next? When the officers realize that they've messed with the wrong person, panic sets in. They didn't know who they were dealing with. And now they're about to face the consequences of their mistake. In this moment, what seemed like an ordinary day for one woman turns into a battle for justice, uncovering deep issues of power, race, and authority. You won't believe what happens when this powerful revelation shakes the officers to their core. Stay with us to find out how everything changes when the FBI steps in. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. The story begins with a black single mother, a woman who is no stranger to the challenges of life. She's a mother of two, juggling work, family, and the daily struggles that come with being a single parent. She's dedicated, loving, and hard-working, doing her best to provide for her children. But every day seems to be another test of patience and resilience. This mother, who we'll call Michelle, isn't looking for trouble. She's just trying to live her life. She's on her way to the store to pick up some groceries after a long day at work. She's tired but determined, doing what any parent does, trying to take care of their family. On the other hand, we have the police officers, the antagonists of this story. Officer Daniels and Officer Harper have a history of using their authority to intimidate others. They're not known for their professionalism, but rather for their overreach, often abusing their power to make people feel inferior. Daniels, in particular, has shown a pattern of treating people unfairly, especially those from marginalized communities. His harsh, unjust methods have made him someone who relies more on intimidation than real justice. So when Michelle walks through the parking lot, minding her own business, the last thing she expects is to be confronted by these officers. Their behavior towards her is not only unfair, but unwarranted. They approach her as if she's already guilty of something, with no regard for her dignity or rights. But Michelle has no idea yet just how big of a mistake these officers are about to make. As Michelle stands there, trying to calmly explain herself, Officer Daniels dismisses her completely, growing frustrated with her calm demeanor. He's already made up his mind about her, and it's not good. What he doesn't know, though, is that Michelle's brother, an FBI agent, is about to arrive on the scene. Everything is about to change. As Michelle stands in the parking lot trying to explain herself to Officer Daniels, her frustration begins to build. She's just an ordinary mother trying to go about her day. She wasn't expecting any trouble, but Officer Daniels' demeanor quickly reveals that he's already decided something about her. Something that isn't true. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stay right here," Officer Daniels demands, his voice harsh. Michelle's brows furrow. She's done nothing wrong. Her hands instinctively grip her purse as she glances around, hoping someone will step in and help. But there's no one to help. The parking lot is mostly empty, and Michelle is starting to feel more and more isolated as Officer Daniels continues to treat her like a criminal. She tries to remain calm, explaining that she's simply on her way home, nothing more, nothing less. But Daniels doesn't care. He's not interested in her side of the story. "I said stay here," he repeats sharply, stepping closer, his stance more threatening. Michelle knows this situation could escalate, but she tries to keep her composure. "I don't know why you're doing this. I'm just trying to get some groceries and go home." But Officer Daniels cuts her off, his patience running thin. "Enough of the excuses. I've heard it all before." He demands her ID, and Michelle reaches into her bag to comply, trying to keep the situation calm. But as she hands over her identification, Officer Daniels doesn't even glance at it. Instead, he begins speaking over her, completely dismissing her efforts to prove her innocence. As Michelle's heart races, her frustration peaks. She has no idea why this officer is treating her like this, but one thing is certain: she's about to find out. Just as Daniels begins to lose his temper, the sound of another car pulling into the lot interrupts the tension. A black SUV parks nearby, and Michelle's eyes widen when she realizes who's stepping out. Her brother, Marcus, the FBI agent, is walking toward them. The atmosphere immediately shifts. The officers freeze. Everything is about to change. As Marcus steps onto the scene, the tension in the air shifts. Officer Daniels and his partner freeze, their confident, arrogant stance faltering. The moment Marcus's sharp eyes land on them, everything becomes clear. His presence commands attention. His posture is that of someone in control, someone who knows exactly what he's doing. His FBI badge, reflecting the sun's rays, catches their gaze, and the reality of the situation hits them harder than any words ever could. For a brief second, Daniels tries to keep up the charade. He opens his mouth, perhaps to say something defensive, but the words catch in his throat. His partner, equally stunned, can only look between Marcus and the now visibly shaken Michelle. The shift in power is immediate. What seemed like an ordinary incident, one officer roughing up a woman, has now turned into something much more significant, something they clearly weren't prepared for. They hadn't expected this. Michelle's heart races in her chest, the adrenaline of the confrontation shifting as she now feels a sense of relief. Her brother, the one person she knew could handle this, had arrived. She knows Marcus. She knows him better than anyone. He's an FBI agent with years of experience in dealing with corruption, injustice, and systemic abuse of power. She's always seen him as a pillar of strength, a protector not just for her, but for anyone who needs help when they're caught in the crossfire of injustice. Marcus doesn't wait. His eyes lock onto Daniels, and his voice, calm and steady, rings out with an undeniable authority. "Is there a problem here?" His question is direct, demanding. It's not one meant for small talk. It's a command. Daniels opens his mouth again, but this time, nothing comes out. The confidence that he had just moments ago starts to evaporate. The sudden realization that he is now facing someone of equal, if not greater authority, shakes him to his core. Michelle watches with a mix of shock and relief, unsure how the confrontation will end, but knowing it's no longer just about her. Marcus doesn't give him room to hide. He takes a step forward, his presence even more commanding. "I think you know who I am, and I think you know what I do for a living. So why don't you explain why you've decided to harass my sister today?" Daniels hesitates, his eyes flicking between Marcus and his partner, who is looking increasingly uncomfortable. Marcus's words carry weight, and the look in his eyes tells them everything they need to know. This is not a situation they can walk away from easily. The power dynamic has completely shifted. The woman they had intended to intimidate is now the sister of someone who can end their careers with a single phone call. I'm just doing my job, sir," Daniels mutters, but his voice is no longer firm. There's fear in his words, an acknowledgement that he no longer has the upper hand. Marcus steps even closer, the tension rising. "Your job? It's your job to harass my sister? You've got to be kidding me. Now, you'll step back and release her, or I'll make sure you regret this." His tone is chillingly calm, but the power behind it is undeniable. The officers glance at each other, the fear now written clearly on their faces. This is no longer an encounter with an unsuspecting civilian. They are facing someone who can and will take action, someone who can bring them down. The atmosphere, once filled with intimidation, is now one of fear, as both officers realize that they've pushed too far. "Step back," Marcus orders again. "Now, and we'll leave it at that." The two officers hesitate. Then, realizing they are no longer in control, they reluctantly back away. Daniels avoids eye contact, his hands fidgeting, as if he's waiting for something, anything, that might allow him to regain control of the situation. As the officers start to retreat, Marcus's words echo in the silence. "This isn't over. Don't think for a second that this won't be reported. You've got a lot of explaining to do." The finality in his voice leaves no room for doubt. Michelle stands there, still shaken, as she watches the officers retreat. She doesn't know what comes next. But one thing is certain. This moment has fundamentally shifted everything. The injustice she was about to face was now met with justice in the form of her brother, someone who would make sure the truth came to light. This moment was about more than just her. It was about the very nature of justice, and the powerful realization that true protection comes not from fear, but from standing up to the very people who wield that fear. As the officers walk away, defeated and humiliated, Marcus stands tall, his eyes fixed on the retreating figures. Michelle breathes a sigh of relief, her body finally starting to relax. She turns to her brother, grateful beyond words for his timely arrival. But Marcus isn't done. His focus shifts back to his sister, making sure she's okay before anything else. He places a gentle hand on her shoulder, his gaze softening. "Are you all right?" he asks, his voice filled with genuine concern. Michelle nods, though the fear still lingers in her eyes. "I'm fine, Marcus, thanks to you." Marcus gives her a reassuring smile, but there's no time for celebration just yet. This incident, no matter how it ended, needs to be addressed. They both know it. "Michelle, this won't just go away," Marcus says seriously, his tone reflecting his years of experience in law enforcement. "We need to make sure this gets reported. This kind of abuse can't go unchecked." Michelle, still processing the events that just unfolded, nods in agreement. "Of course. But what happens now?" Marcus takes a deep breath. "Now we take this to the right people. It's time for the world to know what happened." The next day, the news of the incident spreads like wildfire. Social media explodes with people condemning the officers' behavior, many expressing outrage at how easily they had mistreated Michelle, a law-abiding citizen and the sister of an FBI agent. The public reaction is swift and forceful, with hashtags like #JusticeForMichelle and #EndPoliceBrutality trending across the country. As the story gains traction, Michelle becomes a symbol of resilience, an everyday person standing up against the system. But the attention isn't just online. News outlets pick up the story, interviewing her about the encounter and the subsequent fallout. What started as a simple case of injustice has now become a nationwide conversation about the abuse of power and the dangers of racial profiling. Marcus, however, stays in the background. He knows this isn't about him, but about what Michelle and others like her have to endure every day. The focus should remain on her, not him. But his presence, his connection to the case, adds weight to the accusations, and as public figures rally behind the cause, the pressure mounts on the police department to take action. Days later, the police department announces an internal investigation into the officers involved. The department issues a public apology, though it feels hollow to many, including Michelle. She knows that words aren't enough. The officers need to be held accountable for their actions. This isn't the end of the story, though. Marcus has already begun working with civil rights groups to ensure that the fallout doesn't stop here. He's helping to build a case that will push for systemic reform, hoping that this moment of injustice will lead to something much larger, a movement for equality and accountability in law enforcement. As for Michelle, her life has changed forever. She never thought her brother's profession would have such a direct impact on her life. But now, she understands the weight of what he does and what it means to stand up for what's right. She's become an unlikely voice for change, and the strength she never knew she had is now being shared with the world. As she looks at her brother, she says quietly, "This isn't just about us anymore, is it?" "No," Marcus replies. "This is about making sure no one else has to go through what you did." And as they continue fighting for justice, they know that the road ahead won't be easy, but it will be worth it. They've started something that can't be undone, and they won't rest until the system is held accountable for its actions. After the news spreads, the public reaction continues to grow stronger. Michelle and Marcus, though both deeply shaken by the incident, realize that they have an opportunity to change the narrative, not just for themselves, but for everyone who has ever faced injustice at the hands of those who are supposed to protect them. As the days pass, Michelle continues to receive overwhelming support. The phone calls, messages, and social media posts flood in, all from people thanking her for standing up to the officers and showing that no matter how powerful the system seems, it's not invincible. Yet, even as the support grows, Michelle knows that this is not a personal battle anymore. This is a fight for the future, for the change they desperately need in the system. Meanwhile, Marcus is working behind the scenes, using his connections to ensure that the internal investigation into the officers is moving forward. He knows that simply apologizing isn't enough. There must be real consequences. He works closely with civil rights groups and legal teams, making sure that they are documenting every aspect of the case, every detail of the officer's misconduct. One morning, Marcus receives a call from the department. It's a big moment. The officers involved in Michelle's arrest have been placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the investigation. But Marcus knows that this is just the beginning. There's still a long way to go before they see justice. He shares the news with Michelle, who, though relieved, remains focused. She understands that it's not just about this one incident. It's about the hundreds, thousands, even millions of people who face the same abuse, day in and day out. With legal action now underway, Michelle finds herself at the center of a growing movement. Her voice becomes more powerful with every interview she gives, and the media starts to take notice. She speaks at rallies and events, sharing her story and encouraging others to speak out. Her bravery sparks a fire in others, and the calls for change grow louder. The spotlight on her case reveals the systemic racism that still runs deep in many areas of law enforcement, and soon, people across the country begin to rally for broader reform. Meanwhile, Marcus has put his training to good use. He's worked tirelessly with lawyers and activists to build a case that not only addresses the officer's actions, but also seeks to bring broader police reforms. They call for more accountability, transparency, and stricter oversight, aiming to prevent this from ever happening again. The momentum builds. Local businesses, schools, and community leaders throw their weight behind the movement, signing petitions and organizing protests. One night, Michelle sits with her brother, the weight of everything they've accomplished, and the road ahead weighing heavily on them both. "Do you think we'll really change anything?" she asks, quietly, her voice full of doubt. Marcus looks at her, his expression hardening with resolve. "We already have. We're just getting started." The feeling of empowerment begins to wash over her. She knows they're on the right path, even if the journey will be long and difficult. The story of her own pain has turned into the story of something larger than herself. A community standing together for what is right. The momentum grows so strong that soon even politicians and public figures start to speak up in support of the cause. Michelle, now at the heart of a movement, continues to be the face of the change they are fighting for. And as they all continue to press forward, Michelle knows that the fight will continue for as long as it takes, for as long as her voice can be heard. They're not just seeking justice for her anymore. They're fighting for the future of the nation and the safety of all those who have been silenced by a broken system. As the investigation into Michelle's case continues, her story has already spread like wildfire across the nation. News outlets report on her wrongful arrest, and social media is buzzing with support for her and condemnation of the officers involved. The hashtag #Justice for Michelle becomes a rallying cry for people everywhere who are tired of seeing people like Michelle treated unjustly by law enforcement. What started as a single, isolated incident now has the momentum of a national movement behind it. People from all walks of life come forward, sharing their own stories of mistreatment, abuse, and the constant fear they live with due to systemic racism in the police force. Michelle, once just a mother trying to care for her son, has become a symbol of resilience and a beacon of hope for those who feel voiceless. Every day brings a new twist. Michelle's case leads to a wave of protests in various cities, demanding justice not only for her, but for countless others who have faced similar discrimination. These protests are peaceful, but powerful. They represent a desire for change, for accountability, and for the dismantling of a system that has historically oppressed marginalized communities. Meanwhile, Marcus's work intensifies. Behind closed doors, he's been coordinating with other public officials, legal experts, and civil rights organizations to create a coalition that can bring about real reform. He knows that this isn't just about holding two rogue officers accountable. It's about taking a stand for an entire community that has been left in the dark for far too long. As Marcus works tirelessly to gather evidence and create momentum, Michelle's voice grows stronger. She is invited to speak at rallies, to meet with government officials, and even to be featured on national talk shows. Her story moves people in ways she never expected, and she realizes just how much power her words carry. One day, Michelle receives an invitation to testify before a congressional committee. This is the opportunity she's been waiting for. The chance to speak directly to lawmakers about the need for police reform. She prepares herself, knowing the weight of what she's about to do. In front of the cameras, she speaks passionately about her experience and what needs to change. "The system that allowed my arrest," Michelle says, "is the same system that has harmed countless others. If we want true justice, we must hold those in power accountable. And that starts with changing the way law enforcement operates in this country." Her words resonate across the nation, stirring conversations in living rooms and classrooms, in offices and online. People who may never have thought much about police reform are now standing behind Michelle, urging lawmakers to act. While Michelle testifies, Marcus is making headway in a different way. He's working with legal teams to launch a nationwide lawsuit against the police department that allowed these abuses to happen. The goal is clear: a full overhaul of police practices, more transparency, and stronger oversight. In the weeks that follow, Michelle and Marcus see more and more of their allies join the cause. Activists, business leaders, and even some politicians begin to support their efforts. The protests grow, and so does the demand for change. It becomes impossible for anyone to ignore. The movement reaches a boiling point when Michelle and her allies are invited to the White House. The president, in response to the national outcry, has agreed to meet with them and discuss the path forward. This is the moment they've all been working toward, the moment when their fight for justice could finally lead to the policy changes they desperately need. As Michelle walks into the Oval Office, she feels both the weight and the hope of everything that has come before. This isn't just about her anymore. It's about every Black person who has been mistreated by the system, every family who has lost a loved one to police violence, and every child who deserves to grow up in a world where they're not afraid of those who are supposed to protect them. The president listens intently as Michelle speaks, and at the end of their meeting, a historic executive order is signed. This order mandates increased oversight of police departments across the country, including new measures to ensure accountability, transparency, and more community engagement. As the news spreads, Michelle and Marcus realize they've done more than just fight for justice for themselves. They've ignited a national conversation and sparked the first steps toward meaningful change. As Michelle and Marcus continue their tireless efforts, they see a wave of positive change sweeping through the nation. The historic executive order signed by the president has set the stage for the long-awaited reform of the police system. The announcement has been met with widespread approval, and it marks a turning point in the fight for justice. But the journey is far from over. Though the victory feels monumental, Michelle and Marcus know that true change requires continued effort. They stay focused, using their newfound platform to push for more concrete steps toward reform, including better training for law enforcement, a more inclusive process for hiring officers, and a stronger commitment to de-escalation tactics. The support for Michelle's movement is overwhelming. Local governments, organizations, and citizens across the country have rallied behind her cause, demanding that their communities also adopt similar reforms. What was once seen as a single woman's fight has now become a nationwide movement that transcends politics and social divides. People of all races, backgrounds, and beliefs are standing together for the same cause: justice. Through this unity, Michelle's message spreads beyond the walls of the White House. She works closely with activists and leaders from across the country to ensure that the momentum continues to grow. She doesn't want the reforms to stop at just the national level. She wants them to reach every city, town, and community across America. One of the pivotal moments in this journey happens when Michelle is invited to give a commencement speech at a major university. Standing before an audience of thousands, she speaks not just about her experience, but about the power of community action. It's not enough to wait for change, she says. Change happens when we come together and demand it. We all have a role to play. Her words resonate deeply with the students and faculty, and many of them are inspired to become more involved in their local communities. The campus becomes a hub for organizing rallies, discussions, and outreach programs dedicated to continuing the work Michelle started. As Michelle's story grows, so does the impact of her work. In the months that follow, many of the reforms she advocated for begin to take root across the nation. More cities and states begin to implement policies that prioritize accountability, transparency, and community policing. It's a long process, but each victory feels like a step toward justice. Through this fight, Michelle has also become a symbol of strength for single mothers everywhere. Her story has shown the world that even when you're up against a system that seems impossible to change, one voice, one action can make a difference. As Michelle and Marcus stand together at the final victory rally, they know that their work isn't done. The movement they've helped lead is still growing, and there is still much to be done. But they can see the change they've sparked, and they know that no matter the challenges ahead, they will continue to fight for justice, equality, and a brighter future. The future is bright, not because the fight is over, but because Michelle and Marcus have shown that change is possible. And as they look out at the thousands of people gathered in support, they know that their journey will continue to inspire generations to come.